I'm joined now by a couple of men well known as bridge builders in the Rochester community, Wendell Amstutz and Paul Larsen. Wendell, you have spent decades bringing leaders of different faiths and political views to the proverbial table of listening and communicating. This latest venture that you and Paul are really heading up is called the Community Respect Project. Let's explain first the premise behind it before we get into who's involved and kind of what your expectations are. So start with how this started.
Well, many people in our community are concerned about the kinds of issues that we faced in 2020 and still face. That seems like a lot of people are saying things to each other that aren't being heard or understood, and therefore miscommunication takes place. And I know that sounds kind of high in the sky, but boy, with listening is the first step to understanding. And if we can understand one another, we can do a lot better. We're capable of some really exceptional things in our community, and that's what we're striving to do, is to help people become all that they were meant to be, as well as that we can serve better, that we can improve our efforts at making a difference in our community.
Paul, you run a travel company and go to places all over the world. Have you ever seen places, you know, being in the Middle East, going to Israel? We know that there is great unrest in other parts of the world, but boy, what we have seen in this last year in our own country has been disheartening. Why did you decide to join Wendell in this?
That I travel all over the world, but it's just as important that we travel across the street. Whether we travel across town or across the ocean, what we discover is we meet people and we build relationships, and we have more in common than we do differences. And in the differences, we can learn from one another. And when we do that, Betsy, our community gets a little bit better.
You call it the Community Respect Project. I like that because over the past year, people who have been friends have decided not to be friends, whether it's on social media or their neighbors physically. And it's been because of the political divide. I'm not talking about the racial divide this country has seen more so in the last year than we've seen in other years, but the political divide. Wendell, speak to that.
Well, I think a lot of times we have a hard time seeing that the other person has a point of view that, even though different than ours, has great value. And we want to say, well, if I can't agree 100% with you, I can't agree partially with you either. And I was with somebody just earlier today who said that it's either, basically, it's my way or none at all. And our country isn't based on that. Our country is based primarily on saying, let's find the best in both perspectives and try to meld it together. I think we can do that yet. It's not a lost cause, but it's certainly a forgotten art.
The Community Respect Project is fairly new. It's in its infancy stage, as we would call it. Paul, what are you seeing so far? How have talks been going?
There's an amazing number of people in our community that recognize the need for it and want to come alongside of it. And it's a diverse group of people, and that's important. One of the first things we'll talk about is listening, Betsy. And that's part of it, is bringing together people to learn to listen.
And when you are talking to adults and you're talking about listening, some people would be maybe a little bit apprehensive. They don't want to be talked down to. People think that they listen to one another. They just disagree, and therefore it's okay to have certain enemies, politically, racially, whatever the reason might be, faith-based even. But this is different. How, Wendell?
Well, I think the difference is that we're saying we want to respect the dignity of people. We show respect to people when we uphold that they're a person of value and worth. And what they have to say, while we may agree to disagree, doesn't say that what you believe doesn't matter. It does matter what we believe. We're not asking people to sacrifice their beliefs or necessarily change their beliefs, but we want people who understand their beliefs to express clearly and give us a chance to understand more where they're coming from. When I can do that, then I begin to appreciate you as a person. It makes a difference.
There's a lot more to this. People involved, those names or folks that people would recognize. Who is in this group? Paul, why don't you start?
There's a lot of people that have contributed, Betsy. Wendell's recently had a conversation with Abdallah from Austin. coming from a Muslim background. Kathleen Harrington has given us feedback. ABC6 News leadership has been part of the questions of how do we better communicate across the community. And there's people from the African American community and a broad spectrum, learning to listen to one another and to understand one another. And like Wendell said, it doesn't always mean you agree, but you show people dignity and you understand the heart and where they come from.
There are going to be a lot more conversations, gentlemen, on this, especially in the month of May. We're going to focus on this. Dignity, respect, listening, communication. We can all be better at that. For that, I thank you both very much for talking to me. This is only the tip of the iceberg. We'll have a lot more conversations, guys.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you. We'll be back.